Welcome to Kent Hance, the best storyteller in Texas. Find us online at hancepodcast.com. We'd also love to hear from you. Send email to info@hancepodcast.com. Chancellor Hance, get us started with your saying of the day.
Saying of the day is the last words are for fools who have not said enough. That was said about people that were about to be executed or their last words at the hospital or whatever. And it was just said that, last words are for somebody, the fool had not said enough.
It's a good one.
So I kind of like that.
Chancellor, we received an email this week from a longtime listener that told us that their favorite story, one of their favorite stories that you've ever told, is the story of the Italian table. And I thought maybe because we have a lot of new listeners that may not have heard that story. If you haven't heard that one and other ones, of course, go back through the library of episodes and listen to them. There's some great stuff there. But I thought today, for our new listeners, would you share that story with everyone?
Yes, it was. It's pretty funny. My wife and I were in Sorrento, Italy, and we were in this store looking around and everything, and she found a table that she thought we couldn't live without. I didn't necessarily think that, and I looked at it, and it's the table that we're seated at now, and it's really a nice looking table, and but it's pretty big, and I said, there's no way that they could ship that to Austin, Texas. And the Italian that was waiting on her, who I thought spoke broken English at best, said in pretty good English, I shipped one to Wimberley, Texas last week. And I knew right then I just bought a table. And we moved it to Lubbock and back to Austin, and it's made the tour pretty good. But, I mean, he just immediately said it.
He was waiting.
Sent one to Wimberley, Texas last week. Wimberley's, 30 miles away?
Yeah.
So it was pretty tough.
They did a good job shipping it. I mean, it's a beautiful table. There's not a scratch or dent on it.
No, they did a good job shipping it from Italy to here, and then from here to Lubbock and Lubbock back. Mm-hmm. So it has survived. I guess it was worth the money. I had my doubts at the time. I wanted to mention a couple of things that were unusual. There was a Dollar General store, and a robber came in and pulled a gun on them and said he wanted all their money. And the clerk said, we can't open the cash register unless you buy something. And so he pointed at some nail clippers and said, I'll buy those. And they said, okay. And, they rang it up, and he reached in his pocket to get some money and everything, and then they slammed it closed and took off running, and he took off running. So I don't know how smart either one of them were, that if, the guy's telling him, well, you gotta buy something first.
I don't know if he's real smart how much money's at a Dollar General store?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot.
Wouldn't be a whole lot of cash, in my opinion.
No.
There's times that somebody will do something thinking they're doing the right thing. And I think back to my friend, Ambassador Tony Gioia, and his wife, Donna, real good friends. And he was appointed an ambassador to Malta by Bush, and served over there, served with distinction, and really enjoyed it. Every Friday night when he lived in Buffalo, he is originally from Buffalo, New York, he would take his mother out. He and his wife, Donna, would take Mrs. Gioia, his mom, out for dinner. And one night, they always went to the same Italian place. They had a guy playing the piano. You could request any song or anything. And so they were about halfway through dinner, and the mother, Mrs. Gioia, passed out. And so Donna went running up to the guy that playing the piano that had the microphone. She said, do you know if there's a doctor in the house? And so he started playing, is there a doctor in the house? Is there a doctor in the house? I said, no, you idiot. We got somebody that passed out. We need to know if there's a doctor in the house. We don't know if you know that song or not, but he'd make the songs up as he went along. I always liked that story. Trying to make an adjustment at the time.
He was locked in on his music, though.
Yeah, that's all he was thinking about. He wasn't thinking about somebody needing a doctor in the house. And, that's pretty good. The one other story that I saw this last week, there was a group that was out scuba diving off the Hawaiian Islands, and the boat left without them. Had a bunch of people and left 5 of them, and they got spotted by somebody, and the Coast Guard came and got them.
Wow.
And there was a movie a few years ago about a guy and his girlfriend were out, and the boat just left without them.
Oh.
And it was in Australia. But this was in Hawaii, and it left 5 people stranded, and somebody saw them, and the Coast Guard came and got them.
Coast Guard does some pretty neat stuff.
Oh, they do.
They're impressive.
When I was in Congress, every year you'd have these high school seniors trying to get appointed to the Air Force Academy. Had a lot of them wanted to be pilots. Mm-hmm. And Air Force Academy, West Point, and Naval Academy, Annapolis. And I had one application. A kid from Odessa one time applied to get in the Coast Guard Academy. And I'd never had anybody apply. We called him and talked to him, and his uncle had been in the Coast Guard. And so he had decided at a young age. I mean, there's just not a lot of people growing up around Odessa and Midland and Lubbock that think about sailing or being in the Coast Guard. But he got in, and I guess, he's still doing them a good job.
Yeah.
So, and they rescue a lot of people, and they do a lot of things. It's a good service. Any of the service academies, whether it's Coast Guard, West Point, Annapolis, Air Force Academy, they're top notch. Mm-hmm. And the people they select are top notch. I always had a committee that would review the people and make recommendations, but you always had anywhere from 5 to 10 for each spot that someone wanted.
One of the quarterback at Army is representing West Texas pretty well.
Yeah, he's from Abernathy, a little town north of Lubbock, about 15 miles north of Lubbock. Played quarterback there. His dad was the coach, and he runs the option for the Black Knights, and has done well. They got beat by Notre Dame on Saturday, but they've had a good season. They've been ranked. It's hard for a service academy to be ranked because they can only take people of certain sizes, so they're not going to get a lot of 6'8", 340-pound linemen. But Bryson Daly is a very good quarterback, and we'll get some votes in the Heisman. I sincerely believe he'll have a shot at it. Probably Hunter, the kid from Colorado, is a front runner. He plays offense and defense. Yesterday they got beat, but he caught like 7 passes and made an interception and broke up 3 passes, and he's really good. He is an all-star that plays almost the entire game.
Going back to the quarterback at Army, the announcers of the game yesterday against Notre Dame, they made a point of saying that he's a son of a coach. And he's been a big difference between the son of a coach and a kid that played a lot of football. He said they really understand team if you're the son of a coach.
Right. I mean, they grow up around it. Mm-hmm. Basketball players whose dad was a basketball coach, I mean, they turn out to be pretty good players because time they're 3 or 4 years old, they're in the gym while they're out shooting, and they get to be pretty good players.
It reminds me of the story Randy Mahomes told about Patrick catching batting practice in the big leagues.
Yeah, he was like 5 or 6 years old and catching batting practice for the New York Mets. I said, God Almighty, what were we thinking? And he was having them, blaze that ball in there, and Mahomes thought he could do it, and time has proven that he was correct.
Yeah, that's a great episode if you want to listen to it, a 2-part episode with Patrick Mahomes' mom, Randy Mahomes. It's a good listen. It's really interesting. You find out things about Patrick Mahomes that you didn't know.
That's exactly right.
Because it's right from his mother's mouth.
Also, there was one other thing that came up before I get into our regular program about unusual foods that people have with each other. And I thought of one. There was a guy in Dimmitt that I knew. He liked to drink beer and eat donuts. I cannot think of anything worse. And he'd have a bunch of both, and there'd be part of the crowd that'd eat the donuts and part of the crowd would drink beer. but he was the only one that drank beer and ate donuts. That's odd.
Not a healthy diet.
No, he's dead. He didn't last long.
Yeah.
I think his heart played out in the 50s. It just couldn't last. It's just pumping so much blood, and with all those donuts and beer, it couldn't pump anymore.
Just doesn't sound very good either.
I wanted to talk today a little about some of the cabinet picks that President-elect Trump or President Trump has made. I guess the one that's made the Matt Gaetz is the one that made the most publicity because everybody was talking about it was going to happen, was not going to happen. And Gaetz, they at one time they talked, and it looked like they had 9 Republicans that were not going to vote for him. And so it was, I think he probably made the right decision for himself. And he's not going to go into Congress, and so there'll be an election there. And there's several members of Congress got appointed to cabinet positions, and they have to go back and run those races. And so and most of them are safe seats, they think, but you can have something that's normally a safe seat and may not be. But when your edge looks like you're 3 or 4 votes ahead, it's going to be close. Supposedly, Speaker Johnson called the president and said, "Don't appoint any more people from the House because it makes our job harder to have control of the House." And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in that regard. But his will be up, and Stephanie Stohanik from New York, hers will be up, and there's a couple others. And so those will be races to watch. And Democrats, they're going to spend a ton of money trying to flip those seats.
That was my question. So when a House member goes to the White House staff, that seat is open, and it's an open election, Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Most of the House members that got appointed are not going to give up their seat until they get approved by the Senate. And so they get approved, then they'll give up their seat and somebody can run for it. And, always keep in mind that somebody will get appointed to the Senate. You can get appointed during your term to the U.S. Senate. You cannot in the House. House got so many members they're not going to miss 1 or 2, but now they may, with the election being as close as it was, and they'll have a close race sometimes when it's a district that may be 60% Republican. Every once in a while, the Democrats slip in and get that, or vice versa. If the Democrats are 60%, and they'll get in and run a good race, and you have a low turnout. And so, if one of the parties, even the minority party, has a low turnout, they can go in and maybe steal a seat. And
the new appointment for Attorney General seems to be very well respected on both sides. I haven't heard a bad thing about her. I mean, they just seem to think she's got the goods.
Pam Bondi was Attorney General for 2 terms and had a distinguished career and is qualified. And that whole thing at Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, who was very close to Trump, he was considered. And but somebody said, well, I thought it'd be too controversial, so they get Matt Gaetz. I don't think that's a valid argument. But Pam Bondi, I think that things were happening fast. She was there in Florida. She's been a big campaigner for Trump. And so I think they decided, okay, let's go with her if he's not going to be able to make it.
She shouldn't probably have any problem with confirmation.
Probably shouldn't. They're going to ask her a lot of questions. She's got some old speeches where she said that people that brought false charges against Trump ought to be investigated to see if they broke the law. And I agree with that. If they broke the law to try to make it a political event, then they ought to be looked at. And if they broke the law, then they ought to suffer the consequences. But she'll get asked those questions. But I still think that she'll go through. without any problems. The some of the appointments, and I go over these today and finish on some of them next week. But yesterday, or day before yesterday, Scott Turner got announced as HUD secretary. And Scott Turner is a Texan. Mm-hmm. He grew up in the DFW area. He played football at J.J. Pierce, the J.J. Pierce Mustangs in Dallas. And he went to Illinois on a football scholarship and track scholarship. And then he played pro ball for over 10 years. And he played on one of the teams. He played for the Chargers in a year they were 1-15. And he was known to have played on one of the worst teams in the history of the NFL. But he was probably the best player on the team. He had a pick six for 75 yards against the Denver Broncos, and this was in 2000, 2001, and then blocked a punt in the same game and was a runner-up for Player of the Week when they got beat, extremely bad. It wasn't even close. But he played for over 10 years and had a successful career. But when he came back, he worked while he was playing for the Chargers. He worked part-time. He had an appetite for politics, and he worked part-time for Duncan Hunter, a good friend of mine I served with in Congress, great guy, and worked for him, and they created a new congressional seat in California. He ran for it, and there were like 17 people, and he came in 7th or 8th, and that's remarkable because he didn't have any money to speak of. And it was an unusual area, and so he moved back to Texas and was working here in different areas and ran for state representative in Frisco and got elected. Mm-hmm. And his second term, he ran for speaker. He didn't get elected, but Speaker Strauss was the one that was prevailing in that. And he was director of the White House Operation and Revitalization Program for Trump during the first election. He had a group that came to Lubbock and talked about what they did as far as revitalization. He talked about that and made a very good impression and speech. And housing is something he's been involved in. And it's a big deal for Trump. He's trying to figure out the best way to get people back where they can buy houses. I had a guy bring me an idea this week on modular housing and how they could build 3-bedroom, 2-bath for less than $150,000, and which would be something that would really look good. Agriculture. Brooke Rollins, a good friend of mine that. She's from Glen Rose, Texas, and went to Texas A&M, and she's the first woman to ever be president of the student body at Texas A&M.
Is that right?
And very first. And that she was also, went to law school at the University of Texas, has her J.D., and she practiced law with Hughes and Luce for a while, and then she worked at the White House as director of the U.S. Domestic Council. And Trump likes her. He believes in her. And the one thing I've found that looking at these appointments, he's not appointing anyone that he doesn't know and know pretty well. That loyalty, he got some people in the first administration that didn't necessarily agree with him on things, and they spoke out. And he was late getting started. That no one thought they could win. They were not prepared. He's prepared this time because he's named almost everyone within 2 weeks that he's going to be appointing. And the Brooke Rollins will do a good job, and that agriculture is a big issue, and especially in Iowa. And so you always have a big election there for anybody that's running for president. State Department, Marco Rubio. he was born in Miami. He was elected to the House of Representatives in Florida. It was named Speaker, and I think he was in his 20s, late 20s, early 30s when he was named Speaker of the House in Florida. And they had term limits on it. When he was term limited out, then he went out and got another business and everything, and then came along for a U.S. Senate race, and he ran and won. And he's been chairman of the Intelligence, the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. So he's dealt with a lot of things in foreign relations. I think he'll be good. He's not there are some people in the Republican Party are kind of isolationists, don't want to do anything. And he's not in that group, but he's not in a group that's ready to go to war in the New York Minute. And that I do think that Trump is working behind the scenes trying to, or I know he is, trying to see if he can get a settlement in the Russian-Ukraine war or in the Middle East, where the Israelis are, fighting Hamas and others. And so he's on that. I don't think either one of those wars would have started had he been in office. And a lot of the foreign leaders are a little afraid of Trump. They don't know what he's going to do. And so, and I always like it, they're a little afraid. It makes it a lot easier for the rest of us. Another Texan came up, John Ratcliffe, for CIA appointment. And John Ratcliffe, he had been director of national security at the White House and got approved by the Senate. And he served in U.S. Congress. Before that, he was U.S. attorney in the Eastern District, handling terrorist type cases, and served 4 terms as mayor of Heath, Texas. Heath's got about 7,000 people. It's not real big. But he went to Notre Dame to undergraduate, and then he went to SMU for law school. And I've known John Ratcliffe a long time. He's a good person. He's a dedicated American, and I think he'll do an outstanding job. He'll be less involved in politics than anyone else, but that's kind of the way the director of the CIA works.
Or should
always
work.
have.
Yeah, it should work that way,
yeah,
right?
it should work that way, and that is the way. Another appointment that I really like is Thomas Homan. He's a cop. Mm-hmm. He's a smart cop, but he could just as easily be pulling me over for speeding or something. And he follows the law. And he worked under Obama, and Obama gave him some awards. He was director of Homeland Security and the director of Border Immigration. And he believes, first of all, his top belief is if someone is here and they're a criminal, you need to find them and get rid of them, send them back to wherever they came from, and do that immediately. And so, and that's what he's going to do. He was a police officer in West Carthage, New York, and that it was his policy to separate children from the parent if they're coming across. And he publicized that, and it was under Obama. He publicized that south of the border, because most mothers, if they think they're going to be separated from a child, they're not going to do it. They're not going to come. And so he came up with that to try to make sure that fewer people actually showed up and tried to cross the border. There's a group out of southern Mexico headed this way with 1,200, and they want to try to get in while, Joe Biden's letting people in. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in that regard. He also, Tom Homan believes that sanctuary cities, that people that go with saying we're not going to enforce the law, it's a crime not to. And so he will be tough. He'll be no nonsense. And that I think you'll see a big change in the security in our border, especially with the finishing the fence and being on top of issues, and that it was very clear what Trump's position was, and Tom Homan will make sure that it's implemented.
And America agreed.
Yeah, America agreed. That was, you look at all the polls. And if you look at the polls now, there's still some L.A. and Denver mayors saying, we're not going to participate, we're not going to let them ship people back. The question right now is, do you believe that convicted criminals or people from insane asylums should be allowed to stay? And, it runs in the high 80s, low 90s. Polls do on that. And so, that's the first. We don't know if there's 500,000 or 2 million that have been admitted that have that issue and have that problem. But if they've committed a crime, and, suppose in Venezuela and some of the countries, they just open their jails and send them this way. And the people were glad to get out of jail, and they came up here, and there's new victims. It is a tough situation. If you look at the number of crimes that have been committed by people that are here illegally, it's astounding. It's a large number. Next week, we'll talk about some of the other cabinet members. Just to give you a feel, but the number one priority is that President Trump is loyalty. And you're talking about a transition team. He'll have a transition team that will look at those 4,000 that got appointed. But the transition team for the cabinet members is all in Trump's head. He may listen to a few people around him, but he's going to be the one making that decision, and not going to be made by a committee. Transition team will make those. The saying of the day: last words are for foolish people who have not said enough. Have a great Thanksgiving. This will be a good week to see family and be together and watch a little football. And so we'll talk to you next week.